We are having a little bit of problem with YouTube, so we are just going to get started here. Welcome, everybody. It's great to see you here on a freezing cold night during a very crazy time in our country. So I am recording this. We will share it to YouTube and encourage people to watch it there, and we will share it on social media. To be admitted into this room, you do have to have your first name and last name. We will be removing people who don't. If you aren't named, please make sure that you go to the upper right corner of your own box, your own Zoom box, and please make sure that you can rename yourself there. And I think most of you, we've already taken care of that. Um, we are in a crazy time in our country. Since Monday, I'm sure that we've all been feeling stressed, maybe depressed, maybe anxious, personally or from a policy perspective, and yet we must continue on. So the four of us are working hard for you in Annapolis, and there's a lot going on here. The plan for tonight is that we will each, starting with our delegates in order of seniority, each of us will give you 10 minutes on some of the work that we are doing here, some of our committee assignments, as well as our legislation and priorities, and then we will take questions. And some of you have submitted questions in advance. We appreciate that, and if there's time, we will take questions from the room. And with that, welcome. I'd like to kick it off with our wonderful delegate, Julie Palakovich Carr. She is on the delegation chair for Montgomery County and is doing fantastic work on the House Ways and Means Committee. So, delegate, please share what you're working on.
Thank you, Senator Kagan, and I'll send my greetings to everybody who joined us tonight too. This is, I think, one of those nights where I'm so glad we continue to do these town halls over Zoom, and we didn't all have to trek out somewhere on the icy roads. I'll start by echoing what the senator was saying. It may seem a little bit, I don't know, jarring or disjointed to folks that we're like focusing on Maryland stuff when there's a lot of things happening at the federal level. But I do genuinely believe that Maryland continues to be a bright spot on so many issues and on so many fronts. I'm so proud of the work that we're doing, that the governor and his administration are doing, that our comptroller is doing, and our attorney general. So, glad we have an opportunity tonight to just lift up some of the things that are likely to come up during this legislative session, as well as the things that we're working on. So just gave that good positive spin, but I will say I got to start with some negative news that people may have already been following about our state's finances, because that is really topic number one on everyone's minds here in Annapolis, is closing our state's $3 billion budget deficit. Um, and I definitely will leave some room for my colleague, Delegate Spiegel, who serves on the Appropriations Committee, to speak more about that. But do want to flag that the state's finances really are the big issue this session, and I would say are coloring all the conversations that are happening in Annapolis. And I know many folks on this call are active participants and write into us. You've testified on bills, et cetera, and we appreciate all of that. But just know that the state's finances may be a barrier this year for certain legislation because there just really is not money for new things. So the governor did release his budget proposal last week, and in the legislature, we are continuing to dig into that budget proposal. It is a great conversation starter, I think, at this point. But I would say for those who've been following closely, it's probably not very likely that we just pass exactly what the governor has proposed in terms of 2 billion in cuts and 1 billion in revenue, and like where those cuts are happening and where that revenue is happening. The budget does start in the House this year, and conversations are already active in both chambers on that front. I do want to note, because I have heard some questions about like why do we have a budget deficit, and I'll say there's a variety of causes, but the big one and the big misperception that I want to correct tonight is our funding for our public schools through the Blueprint for Maryland's Future is not the driver of our current budget shortfalls. The investments that we're making in schools are still fully funded this year and next year. We are facing a shortfall down the road, but that is not what's causing the current issue now. Really, and unfortunately, economic growth in our state has slowed down, and that is part of it. It's also just that the pandemic funds have ended, but there are some other causes on that front. Notably, also on the budget, that $3 billion deficit that we're talking about is before any of the, very likely changes that come down from the federal government. Maryland is a state that has many, many federal workers, and we love that. They make great contributions to our state and, in fact, to our state's economy. So if there were layoffs or movement of federal agencies out of Maryland, that could actually exacerbate the problems that we're facing at the state level. And also note, the other big potential with the new Congress is federal tax changes. And certainly there were costly impacts to Maryland the last time this happened. So those are all, I'd say, the factors that we're kind of monitoring at the moment. It looks like someone else needs to get muted here. Senator Kagan, I don't know if you can help
I'm
with
on
that.
it.
Thank you.
Okay, if you all could mute your phones, that would be great, Ellen. Okay, go ahead. Sorry, Delegate.
No worries, no worries. Yeah, so I just want to use my remaining time to just speak about some of the bills that I'm sponsoring this session. Just today, actually, we held a press conference to announce the revenue raising proposal that Senator Shelley Heddleman and I are sponsoring, again, the Fair Share for Maryland Act. That is legislation that is looking to address some inequities in our state's tax system while generating much needed revenues to pay for schools, for our investments in roads and bridges and public transit, as well as just, supporting the essential services that our state agencies provide. So I think that might be in the news tomorrow, and I'll certainly share links for that in my newsletter this weekend if that's the case. But that package really is with an eye towards implementing progressive tax changes, making sure that really big corporations are paying their fair share, and making sure that people who are, making, not have assets, but making millions of dollars, in some cases billions of dollars each year, are really paying their fair share of taxes. On the housing front, that was a very active topic of legislation this past session, thanks in large part to Governor Moore and his administration. It looks like housing is going to be an active issue again. We all know that housing continues to be very unaffordable, both for purchasing and for renting here in Maryland. And this session, I am bringing forward legislation to address the kind of the affordability on the rent side. If folks have seen in the news, our state is actually suing 6 major landlords because they are using an AI-based software that allows them to illegally collude on setting rents. And the Biden administration just a few weeks ago, in their last few weeks in office, put out an analysis that estimates in the DC metro area that's costing renters on average $112 a month because landlords are illegally colluding on rent price fixing. So we're putting legislation to stop that practice here in Maryland. I continue to chair the Early Childhood Subcommittee in the House, and I think childcare will be an active issue as well this session. We're expecting to see a number of bills on that front, really trying to get at affordability and removing barriers for these small businesses that provide such an essential service in our state, and I'll be sponsoring legislation there as well. Elections and election law continues to be an active area for me, and Senator Kagan and I actually are sponsoring 2 campaign finance reform bills together this session. And then I'll end with noise cameras. Folks may have remembered me talking about this in the past. We last year
Let me
all of us
see.
voted to pass a pilot program for Montgomery and
On the
Prince George's
14th,
counties to use noise
a Tommy.
cameras. And the good news is that both jurisdictions have enacted their own local ordinances and are both going through the procurement processes right now. And actually, specific to D17, things are looking good that we'll get a camera at least some of the time under that pilot in District 17. But we just want to make sure that there's enough time for that pilot really to get up and off the ground. So sponsoring legislation again this session to extend that pilot program for another 2 years. With that, I'm happy to turn things over. Senator Kagan, would you like me to introduce Delegate Vogel, or are you planning on doing that?
Yeah, I'll do it.
No
Sorry,
worries.
I'm biased here. I love to brag about my delegates because I think District 17 just has the best team. We work so collaboratively together, and we're so committed to the residents of Rockville and Gaithersburg. So next up is Delegate Joe Vogel. He's in his second term. He's a dynamo also on the Ways and Means Committee, and you have seen him out in the community. He's all over the place. And Delegate Vogel, why don't you give us a few minutes on what you're working on?
Hey everyone, it is so great to be with all of you and with my colleagues here from the District 17 delegation who I can having the opportunity. Today, we actually had a joint hearing where all three delegates from the District 17 delegation were all in the same room together on the blueprint. One of the I love being back in Annapolis, but really the time that we spend in the interim in Gaithersburg and Rockville, I think is so informative. So as I speak through a lot of these bills today that I'm working on, one important thing to mention is that many of them come from conversations that I've had with many of you. I can think of the rental junk fee bill that we're working on right now that started with a conversation with Councilmember Hernandez, or the captive audience meeting ban bill that started with a conversation at the D17 picnic, I think a year and a half ago. Before I get into my specific bills, just want to touch on a few macro legislative issues. The blueprint is an issue of major concern. I sit on the Education and the Revenue Subcommittee on Ways and Means, two subcommittees that will be closely engaged in making sure that we fulfill our commitment to educators and students, and fully fund the blueprint and fully implement it with fidelity. The governor has been speaking about how our North Star right now is economic growth for the state. I agree. And I think the foundation of that is a strong public school system, which is what we are working to build with these investments. And second, we are on, it feels like day 500, but I think it's day 3 of the Trump administration. And I've sent a very clear message. I was interviewed by WJLA Channel 7 the other day, where I said that one of our major responsibilities right now needs to be to make sure that every law in the books in Maryland is protecting every vulnerable community, whether that be immigrant communities, LGBTQ plus children in our schools, veterans, seniors, the federal workforce, women seeking reproductive health care. We are going to do everything we can. I'll speak for myself, but I know my colleagues are right there with me to protect every community that is going to be targeted under this administration. But I also want to say that while that's the case, we're good at walking and chewing gum at the same time. So we're going to continue delivering for working families, supporting businesses, and addressing many of the issues that I'll mention quickly in the bills that I'm working on. And I will just emphasize that I'm really proud of the work that we're doing in a bipartisan way across party lines. Many of the bills that I'm going to mention right now are actually with Republican co-sponsors as well. So showing that we're going to stand up to this administration when necessary, but continue to work in a bipartisan way and get things done for the families here in our district. So quickly, a few bills that I'm working on related to education. I'm working with Senator Kagan on a bill to build out a civic excellence program here in our state to promote civics amongst our students. Working on legislation to address really the rise in discrimination across the board, whether it be anti-Semitism, racism, or other forms of hate, by requiring that our institutions of higher education designate a Title VI coordinator. I sponsored that. I'm the lead sponsor here on the House side, working together with Senator Waldstreicher. But when that story of that bill was reported, I'm now hearing from legislators across the country and other states who are actually sponsoring similar legislation as well. So I'm very excited about that. Many of you have probably heard of concerns around the closure of Montgomery County's virtual academy, which provided a virtual option for students that cannot get back in the classroom for really mainly for reasons related to disabilities. And that program was closed, leaving many students without access to the kind of education that I believe they deserve. So we're working on, we actually just finalized the bill and submitted it yesterday to address that issue. In terms of wages, unions, and worker benefits, we're taking action on with 2 bills to really shore up the progress that was made by the Biden administration that we either expect to get some pushback down the line or that's already gotten some legal pushback. So one is the Biden administration raised the threshold on overtime salaries to $58,000, allowing so many more Marylanders and really people across the country to qualify for overtime wages. A judge in Texas ruled that to be unlawful. And I don't think that Marylanders should be limited by what a judge in Texas decides. So we're sponsoring legislation here in Maryland that would raise that threshold for Maryland workers. So more Maryland workers just get higher wages, which would be good for our economy and good for working families. And number 2, a bill that I'll touch on quickly is the Worker Freedom Act. which follows actions by the National Labor Relations Board to ban captive audience meetings in the state of Maryland. I sponsored that bill as well, actually, before the NLRB had ruled, but the NLRB ruled. We know that's the right way forward. We know that banning those meetings is in accordance with labor law. Now we just need Maryland to join the many states that have already taken action on those bans. Many of you have probably heard me talk about investments in our climate tech system before, or building out our climate innovation sector in our state, a new economy, new businesses, helping new businesses grow. Worked with Senator Feldman from Potomac last session on a bill to help create a founders fund for those businesses. And I actually spent some time in the interim visiting many of those businesses across the state. And one concern that I heard from many of them was the holdup that they've faced getting permits and licenses. So I have two pieces of legislation to help optimize our permitting and licensing process, make it easier for businesses to get those permits and licenses, and addressing some of the delays that we have seen. And lastly, I'll touch quickly on, many of you have heard me speak before about the work that we've done addressing the fentanyl overdose epidemic, which continues to kill so many Marylanders from overdoses. We are making progress. If you see the number of overdoses, they've actually declined in the state of Maryland, but we are nowhere close to addressing this epidemic the way we should. So I have legislation to address the use of naloxone in schools, to promote the use of naloxone, promote students, allow students who want to carry naloxone, who are trained to carry naloxone, to be able to do so within the building. Montgomery County has already taken action there, but the rest of the state needs to follow. And then had a really productive conversation with a council member in Baltimore City about the use of buprenorphine, administration of buprenorphine by paramedics, and what buprenorphine does, really quickly, not to get into the details, but it takes away the symptoms of withdrawal for 24 hours. So when that's administered in the field, folks can get into treatment within the 24-hour period, and that treatment, be able to obtain further treatment. But that initial administration is critical. And last bill I'll touch on is the bill on rental junk fees. Similar to, I love the bill that Delegate Palakovich Carr is working on the AI price fixing of rents. As a renter myself, I know that there are so many junk fees that renters are faced with every month that aren't disclosed. We know the Biden administration had been working hard to take on junk fees. The city of Gaithersburg has led the way on this issue, and I hope that the state of Maryland follows the lead of the city of Gaithersburg in enacting legislation to address the use of to address this issue and provide for more price transparency for renters. With that, I'm eager to take all your questions, but I'll turn it over back to Senator Kagan to introduce Delegate Ryan Spiegel.
Thank you so much. Terrific presentation, as always. Delegate Ryan Spiegel is up next. He is our new legislator who's doing wonderful work on the Appropriations Committee, which is where the money's at and where not enough money is at. As you all know, he was a longtime Gaithersburg City Council member and is doing a great job for the residents of Rockville and Gaithersburg in Annapolis. Ryan?
Thank you so much, Senator. It's great to see so many friends and familiar faces on the Zoom this evening. I'm going to echo the concerns of my colleagues that we have with this new administration, the sense of fear and frustration, but also a sense of gratitude to be in a state like Maryland in this particular moment, and to be with all of you who are such great advocates and allies who can stand up for the values and the priorities that we all believe in. And that's the silver lining, I think, in this moment. And that's why we are focused on making sure that our state and local laws are strong and that we maintain our sense of openness and welcoming as a community that celebrates our diversity, as a district that is one of the most diverse in the country. And I do want to give a shout out to the municipal officials from Gaithersburg and Rockville that I know are on the call, as well as Sheriff Wee. Thank you for being here and for your commitment to protecting all of us, including our immigrant neighbors, and also to all of the other community and party leaders who I see here this evening. As others have mentioned, I serve on the Appropriations Committee. We have an interesting arrangement in the structure of the House of Delegates, a little bit different than the Senate, where we have two committees. One The Ways and Means Committee deals with the question of how to generate revenue for our state budget and our state programs. And the Appropriations Committee deals with how to spend that money and how to prioritize what we're going to spend it on. Whereas in the Senate, the Budget and Tax Committee does both in one committee. But we work very closely in the Appropriations Committee with Ways and Means to strategize about how we're going to move forward on discussing, debating, and changing the proposed budget presented to us by the governor. I actually just left a gathering with the chair of the Senate Budget and Tax Committee, who characterized our budget situation not as a crisis. He said, yes, it's a very, very big challenge, and some of it can be a little scary, but we're going to get through it. And starting with the working draft of the governor's proposed budget and some fixes that we know we can implement if we work together over the course of the rest of this session, we will get through it. We won't get everything we want. There will be some hard compromises and challenging conversations, but we will. And actually, the interesting thing is that of all the legislation that we put forward as legislators in the House of Delegates and in the Senate over the course of any given legislative session, our state constitution specifically says that the only thing that we're really required by Constitution to do is pass a budget every year, and it has to be balanced. So when you hear about the deficits, what you're hearing about is what I call structural deficits, or what many of us call structural shortfalls, which really means if we continue supporting the level of programs and the diversity of programs and priorities that we have right now, projected out into the future of a year, 2 years, 3 years, and so on, at the levels that we are at now, given what we estimate about our revenues going forward based on our current tax structure, that there will be a shortfall. But that's different than saying that there is a shortfall in the current fiscal year. There is no actual deficit in any given year because we have to have a balanced budget from year to year. So we're really talking about the structural shortfall projected for next year and beyond. And I think Delegate Palakovich Carr did a great job giving you an introduction to kind of how we got here. I wanted to add just a few other things in addition to highlighting the fact that the drying up of federal COVID and emergency relief dollars is really a big piece of what changed the equation. And also her point, which really needs to be reemphasized, that the state's commitment to the transformative educational blueprint program for K through 12 education is not, I repeat, is not the cause of our structural deficit, because that program is separately funded for at least the next couple of years. We will have to deal with funding it in the out years, but it is funded for the next couple of years. So when you hear in the media folks talking about education and the need to cut our educational blueprint commitment to pre-K, to teachers, to college readiness, to all of these things, that is not really what is driving this deficit conversation. A few other things that did contribute to the deficit challenge are that our Medicare program, Medicaid program, excuse me, as well as our child care subsidies program ended up becoming oversubscribed. More people took advantage of those important programs than we anticipated, which is a good problem to have because it means folks who are in need are finding the programs that we in Maryland are providing for them. But it also means that it creates more of a cost and a strain on our budget, and that's a big driver as well. In terms of the governor's proposed budget, some of the cuts that are possibly most concerning to folks include cuts in the Developmental Disabilities Administration's funding, which a lot of folks rely on, to get by day to day. Reductions in, or proposed reductions, I should say, in funding for crime victim programs, and then placing a cap, which ends up being an effective reduction in funding on the child care subsidy program, which so many people rely on. So those are things that the Appropriations Committee is particularly focused on figuring out how to address and see if we can maybe even back them out of the governor's proposed budget and find ways to fund them and move them forward in some form. because people need those programs. They really rely on those programs, and they are important. Separate from the general fund and the operating budget is the Transportation Trust Fund, which is the centralized fund that we use for our transportation program in the state. And that includes roads, it includes transit, it can include bike and pedestrian pathways, bridges, ports. And so this is an important piece of the overall budget discussion that is not part of the general fund and the operating budget. The Transportation Trust Fund was also facing a significant multi-billion-dollar shortfall last year. We did shore it up a little bit with some smaller moves to generate additional revenue, but they really were not long-term fixes. And the governor's proposed budget that just came out seeks to inject between $420 and $470 million per year over the next several years to fully fund the transportation program, the Consolidated Transportation Program, which is essentially the budget of capital projects and maintenance for transit and roads in the state. And so that is very good news. How does he propose to do that and to generate that money? He proposes that some vehicle registration fee increases and MVA fees that were supposed to go into effect in a couple of years get accelerated. He's proposing a retail delivery fee surcharge on deliveries from Amazon and other services that will deliver goods and other products to your home, 75 cents per transaction or per delivery, I guess. So if that ends up passing, you'll see a 75-cent increase in the cost of an Amazon delivery or some other comparable delivery service. He is proposing that we limit tax exemptions for old vehicle trade-ins that are worth more than $15,000. And we've already heard from some folks with concerns about that. And he's proposed raising the fee that you pay when you go to get your vehicle inspected for emissions every year or two from $15 to $30 or $40 to shore up this transportation trust fund. The reason the trust fund is having so many problems is because it has been keyed to the gas tax for many, many decades. And for a lot of reasons, people are driving less, people are using more fuel efficient vehicles or electric vehicles, and therefore are not paying as much in gas tax. They're working remotely or they're working in hybrid fashion. And that is resulting in less revenue coming into that transportation trust fund. And so I want folks to be aware of that because that is sort of a separate budget challenge from the general fund that we are working on as well. I was reassigned from a public safety subcommittee of the Appropriations Committee to a transportation and environment subcommittee of the Appropriations Committee. So I'm really focused on these transportation issues this year. And I think given that we have a district made up of two large cities that rely on highway user revenues, which are funds that come out of that transportation trust fund, and we have a lot of important road and transportation projects that need to be addressed in our district, I think this is a good opportunity to focus on those and try to make sure we have enough resources for our district as well as other districts around the state. I also serve as the chair of the Montgomery County House Delegations Committee on Land Use, Transportation, and Public Safety, which also aligns very well with my work on the Appropriations Committee. And we have already passed 3 bills out of our committee dealing with road safety, primarily relating to details and aspects of how to deploy speed camera systems. There's a pilot program that's being proposed by one of those bills to deploy cameras on stop signs for people who blow through stop signs, endangering other drivers, endangering pedestrians. And it's already in place in Prince George's County, and we're going to see if we can pass it to use it as a pilot in Montgomery County as well. It's kind of an interesting use of technology. So those are some of the things I'm working on in my committee. My own separate bills that I've been working on for this session include a local bill to bolster protections for unit owners in HOA and condo communities. We recognize many HOA and condo boards and property managers do a great job, but some don't. and we need to make sure that folks who live in those communities are not being abused by exorbitant and inappropriate fees and fines, and being prohibited from using the common spaces and assets of the community unless and until there's been some sort of adjudication against them for doing something wrong. I'm also reintroducing a bill to explore the possibility of creating internal regional transportation authorities within the state as a way to help deal with this funding crisis for transit and transportation. It copies a lot of the successes from Northern Virginia, and so we're going to continue to have that conversation this year as well. I've got some bills on relieving medical debt and collecting information on student loans so we have a better understanding of the size of the problem, including a bill to require employers, state agencies to do a better job notifying and cooperating with their employees who do apply for federal student loan forgiveness. And so those are some of the things that I'm working on. We are also, as a team in District 17, working on legislative bond initiative proposals. These are capital projects specific to our district that we're trying to get some funding for our local governments and our nonprofits, and more to come on that. But there is a pot of money in the governor's proposed budget, not as big as it was last year, but there is a pot of money for those legislative bond initiatives. So stay tuned on that.
All right, great job, Delegate Spiegel. Thank you. So now it'll be my turn here. So I am going to do this, and then I'm going to do this. So give me 2 seconds. I am trying to do all the things at once, which is a little hard to do. All right, so Cheryl Kagan, very proud to be the senator for Gaithersburg and Rockville. And as always, I have a very busy agenda and a great team to help me through it. I'm going to start with some of the stuff that you all have heard me talk about for years, which are the legislative areas that I work on. Each of us have areas that we're kind of known for, that we are expert at, and people come to us when they have questions. So I'll start with 911. I think everyone knows in this room that 3 people have died in our district when 911 has failed. And starting with our dear friend, the wonderful activist Carl, who inspired my work on these issues. I've spent now 11 years working on 911 related issues. And that, so I have a number of bills this year that will continue. If you guys can make sure you're muted. Trying to find the not muted person. If you can mute yourself, that'd be great. Lorianne. Okay. I think Councilwoman Lorianne Sales wanted to make sure we knew she was here. We knew she was here. In any case, so we continue to work on 911. I was asked to actually chair a new 911 specialist work group, trying to make sure that we are taking care of the courageous women and men under the headsets, making sure they are paid well, benefited well, deal with recruitment, retention, training, and so much more. 988, making sure that 911 and 988, the crisis and suicide prevention hotline, which provides life-saving care around the country for free, making sure that those calls can be easily interconnected and that service is easily available. Cyber attacks are a huge problem, and I have legislation that was one of my top priorities that will make sure that that anyone trying to hack into a 911 center to shut it down, or who succeeds, that there are consequences, whether it's a 911 center or also providing a possibility of going much broader. I think you all remember the CrowdStrike attacks, which shut down, not attacks, but the incident that disrupted hospitals and airports and critical infrastructure, personal computers, and so much more. So we've been working on that as well. along with Delegate Palakovich, Carr, and Delegate Vogel on the Ways and Means Committee, working with my colleagues on election law. Now, to be clear, Maryland runs great elections. We do so much right, and we are a role model for others in the country. I serve on the National Election Assistance Commission and continue to work with the National Council of State Legislatures as the vice chair of the Elections and Redistricting Committee. So I am really immersed at the national level, but I also have a lot of election bills this year. The Senate passed a number of my bills last year, but they either didn't have time or died in the House. Everything from special elections to make sure that our legislators are elected and not selected. So I know that my House colleagues here are very supportive, and we're hoping that this year it will move through. It will be a constitutional amendment and will be on your ballot next year if we get it through legislatively. Municipal elections, working with the Maryland Municipal League to provide support for cities like Gaithersburg and Rockville. Simplified ballot language so that you're not reading a bunch of jargon when you're trying to figure out how to vote on something that's on your ballot. Many more election bills. There have been conspiracy theories, and I think one of the issues that isn't talked about is transparency. We work very hard at the statewide level to have transparency, but I think the local boards of elections also need to be transparent so that people can watch the board meetings and watch the debate and the canvasses when ballots are being counted. Nonprofits. I have 3 bills. I'm often described as the senator for the nonprofit sector. I have 3 bills for nonprofits. One of them we just had a hearing today that went very well. My green and renewable energy for nonprofit organizations has passed 3 times unanimously through the Senate, and we are hoping that we are going to be able to get the House to move forward with it this year. It's a revolving loan fund to let nonprofits go green and be part of the climate solution so that they can put solar panels on top of their, homeless shelter, battered women's shelter, arts organization, and then they only have to pay 10% of it. The rest of the cost is an interest-free loan, and they start repaying it with the savings that they have from reduced energy bills. When I told our congressman, or one of our Congress members, Jamie Raskin, about it, he thought it was such a great idea several years ago that he got it added to the federal infrastructure bill, and it has been operating at the national level very successfully for the last 3 years. I am proposing, one of my key bills is to create a nonprofit navigator. There is one person at the Department of Commerce who is sort of a point person for small businesses who want to know, who need help figuring out the bureaucracy. And so we're proposing one person, and it's got to be very small because there isn't a lot of money to go around. But we know with the Trump administration and with cuts to the budget, there's going to be even more of a burden on our nonprofit organizations. And so they're going to need a point person to say, is this money available? Are we eligible for this grant? How will I make sure that my grant money comes through in a timely manner? All that. Delegate Spiegel talked about the legislative bond initiatives. We always have worked together to make sure that we are successful in bringing back state funds for priorities in Gaithersburg and in Rockville. Gaithersburg City Hall is beautiful and large, and the city could use some money. And then again, Delegate Spiegel has talked about in Rockville, Talbot Park, Elwood Community Center, Elwood Smith, and Montgomery History, which is a countywide organization that everyone's going to be working for to make sure that gets through. To be clear, there is a lot less money available this year than there has been in the past. I'm going to wrap up with just a few more things. I am the senator on the Maryland State Arts Council. I served on it before, and I'm very proud that the president appointed me again. We are all pretty active on social media. So look for us on Facebook, on Twitter or X and Instagram. Follow us. We're all pretty engaged. It's a great way of following and knowing what we're doing. I have a podcast. I think you all know this, Kibitzing with Kagan. I have interviewed and chatted with virtually every single member of the Moore Miller administration's cabinet. I am setting up, I think, what's the last person, and hoping to tape it in the next week. So check that out, and you can subscribe. We love it when you come to visit. So whether it's with an advocacy organization like Moms Demand Action or the League of Conservation or AARP, we love it when you come, or just come and tour Annapolis. It's a beautiful city, a lovely state house, and we love seeing folks from home. And I think you know that I am a nationally ranked Scrabble player. I just got back from New Orleans, where I competed in another national tournament, and I am very excited that I was able to bring the national championships back to Maryland in August. So that's going to bring jobs and tax revenue and all that. So delighted about that. So with that, I want to read some of the questions that you all were kind enough to submit. But before I do, I want to recognize our wonderful elected officials who are in the room. And I suspect it's possible that I have missed some people, but I've been trying to be diligent. So from the county council, I saw County Council Member Evan Glass and Council Member Lori Ann Sales. From Rockville, Mayor Monique Ashton, council members Barry Jackson, Kate Fulton, and Marissa Valeri. From the city of Gaithersburg. Yikes, where's my other sheet? From the city of Gaithersburg, Mayor Judd Ashman and council members Jamil Hernandez, Lisa Henderson. And I don't know if I missed anyone else from Gaithersburg. John Compton is here, Washington Grove Mayor. Our wonderful sheriff, Max Wee, is in the room. Thank you, Max, for all you do. Rockville's terrific, still fairly new city manager, Jeff Mihalik, Tom Lonergan Seeger, our partner from Gaithersburg, the assistant city manager who does such a great job. I want to recognize David Naiman, the chair of the Montgomery County Board of Elections, who works so long and diligently on our elections. And then former elected officials, I saw Dolly Kildee, Mark Pershela, Yvette Monroe, and there may be others. And then from the party, I want to recognize the fantastic Ellie Shaw-Belbidia. Jennifer Hosey is here. Alan Rosen, who works so hard to help Ellie and others with all that we do. And every one of you who is a precinct chair and activist and engaged resident of our district. We are so glad that you're here, and we are grateful for your interest. With that, I'm going to start reading some questions. And
before you read the first question, I have one addition. You did a great job. You caught everybody. I think I also want to acknowledge Susan Kennedy from Delaney's office is here too.
Thank you. Yes, great one. Thank you. Susan, we're so proud that you are helping our new Congresswoman, Congress member, April McLean Delaney, to get off to a great start. So good hire. We look forward to partnering with you. So, and Adam Van Grack might be in the room. Adam, if I missed you, welcome. You're always so active. So glad to have you here. So the first question, I think I'll toss to the new guy. No, I won't. To Delegate Vogel. Aileen Klein wanted to know, how can we most effectively lobby our senator and delegates?
Delegate Vogel. All right. I was actually just having a conversation about this with some constituents that are involved in advocating for one of our education bills. And, you know, one of the beautiful things about the General Assembly is that as we get those phone calls, as we get those emails, as we get tagged in Facebook and Twitter, I see it myself, right? Or I hear about it myself, or I read those emails. So it really matters as you're speaking out, both about specific concerns that you're seeing, whether it be, concerns that you're seeing in your community. This morning, we got an email about hot water and Kentland's in our office called right away to see what was going on, whether it be a bill that you're supportive of. I think Art Millihan is on here. I know he's in our office in Annapolis, calling our phones all the time, sharing his concerns and his views on legislation. So we'll all be sure to send our emails on here with our information, and I'll share my cell phone number as well. But please reach out, and with other legislators, even if they don't directly represent you, if they're supporting a bill that you like, make sure to reach out to them and see how you can help. And if you have any more specific questions on that, please feel free to follow up with me directly, Eileen.
Great. Thank you, Delegate Vogel. Delegate Spiegel, we've got some budget questions that are submitted. So Margaret and Mark, and there were several others, but wanted to speak about cuts to disability services. Can you talk about what other cuts could be made that can allow some money to be restored in a supplemental budget?
Yeah, first of all, it's not really a supplemental budget. I'll just kind of remind folks that the process is that the governor's proposed budget is that a proposal. There are many good things in it. There are some things in it that I believe ultimately the House and the Senate will disagree with and make some changes on. That's the normal process. So I think, be on the lookout for that. Continue to advocate against cuts that you see in the proposal that you don't like, right? If not only we as your representatives in District 17, but members of the committees that are going to be addressing these issues, leadership, it's always good for them to hear from folks that they have strong concerns about certain aspects of the proposal. But we won't need a supplemental budget. What we'll need is to use the process of the remainder of the legislative session to make changes to hopefully reduce some of these cuts. We have already started to hear from a lot of folks in the community about the Developmental Disabilities Administration cuts. We've seen folks here in Annapolis already starting to appear to advocate and gather and hold up signs and have rallies. The ultimate formula for what allows us to keep things that are our priorities is balancing revenue with our spending. So that may mean looking at other spending that's in the proposed budget and making some changes elsewhere, some reductions elsewhere to allow us to put back some of the funding for things that we think should be put back. It may also mean, looking to my friends on the Ways and Means Committee, having additional discussions about ways to generate revenue. The governor's proposal relies on a series of proposed revenue generators. Delegate Palakovich, Carr talked about a few of them. There are some additional ones related to the estate tax, related to changes to income tax brackets, to removal of the itemization of state returns, and other things that the governor has put in there to generate revenue.
Okay.
The question will remain open as to whether or not we decide to put additional revenue in there to try to backfill some of those cuts.
Okay. Thank you, Delegate Spiegel. And you will want to stay connected with all four of us. Each of us does newsletters and updates. Again, I referenced social media, but if you're not on our email list, I suspect it will be very easy. You can sign up on my website. I think that's probably the same thing for the House, the wonderful members of the House. Delegate Palakovich, Carr, this question is for you on the Ways and Means Committee. We got a question about in the budget on inheritance and estate taxes.
Yes. So the governor's proposal, one of his proposed, well, it's not exactly a revenue raiser. I'll clarify that statement in a moment, but tax changes is to do away with our state's inheritance tax and to pay for that by making more wealthy estates subject to our state's estate tax. So for those who aren't familiar, the estate tax is paid right now by estates that are worth at least $5 million. And the governor's proposal would lower that to $2 million. And I believe that tax is paid directly by the estate. The inheritance tax is paid by people who receive things from someone who has passed away. So there are certain immediate family members who are exempted from the inheritance tax, but Maryland is somewhat unique in that we have both taxes. It is notable that the inheritance tax is mostly paid by people who don't reside in Maryland. So I'll say this is one part of the governor's proposal that, personally I'm giving a lot of scrutiny to, because I think the tax benefits of that largely is not going to help Marylanders. But again, continues to be a point of conversation. I will point out that on the estate tax piece, that is part of the Fair Share for Maryland Act that I mentioned during my remarks. We are looking to lower that threshold in order to raise some more revenues for the state.
Okay, thank you, Delegate. And you should know that Delegate Palakovich Carr is known as a real tax guru, and she's got some important policies and has been working with the governor on those. And maybe there'll be a chance to chat a little more about that, Julie. Appreciated the question from Harvey about protecting reproductive rights in Maryland, and I'll take that. So I suspect that everyone in this room is pretty close to being aware that we are in a hot mess on reproductive choice. Abortion is health care, and today is the anniversary of the Roe v. Wade decision by the Supreme Court, and yet now this Supreme Court has undone all of that with their Dobbs decision. In Maryland, however, we are a safe place to be of reproductive age. And if somebody has a serious fetal abnormality or it's not the right time, or for whatever reason, she doesn't want to or is not ready to carry a pregnancy to term, there are choices in Maryland. There's even a new clinic in Western Maryland, and it serves people in West Virginia and Pennsylvania and other places. And I want to give a shout out to our former Congress member, David Trone, who helped bring that to be. I have made personally a modest donation to that clinic. You might want to do that. Maybe if someone on this Zoom wants to put the link to that clinic, donations of any amount will help them provide needed health care to women who are traveling from other states. It is a mess out there, and it has the potential to get worse as Donald Trump is going to be appointing more judges around the country. So anything any of the delegates want to add to that, or should I move to the next question? Moving on.
Senator, I'll just briefly add, our colleague Delegate Leslie Lopez has an interesting bill this year that would tap into some unused funds from health insurance payments, I think, to be used for reproductive health care or protection of reproductive health care providers.
Right. Thank you. So Nate asked about healthcare issues, and he wants to know what healthcare issues are going to be addressed in the General Assembly this year. And several people asked about healthcare more broadly. Delegate Vogel, you want to kick off on that?
Sure. So look, I sit on the Ways and Means Committee, so I don't have oversight into all of the legislation that's being considered now when it comes to healthcare by the Health and Government Operations Committee. I will just touch on one issue quickly that I'm working on in the public health realm, aside from the work that I already mentioned on the opioid overdose epidemic, which is on what really is a public health crisis, the issue of social isolation and loneliness that really impacts so many different communities. We sponsored this legislation. We pre-filed it, so individuals have been able to see it now on the website for weeks, and we've had advocacy organization after advocacy organization reaching out to our office wanting to be part of this task force as well, because this is obviously an issue that impacts the issue of social isolation and loneliness, impacts aging communities, but it also impacts communities of people with disabilities, rural communities. The mental health organizations are very engaged here as well, and this was an issue that the previous Surgeon General under the Biden administration declared to be a real public health crisis, and something that I think our state needs to really be looking into.
Okay. Delegate
Can
Vogel,
I-
Delegate Palakovich, Carr, please. Yeah.
Yeah, I'll just add to that. And again, I can't give too many insights, but I will say it does appear that medical debt is going to be an active area of legislation. This year, I am aware of at least 3 bills on that front, basically trying to protect people who do have medical debt from losing their home because of a lien. I'm working on legislation to keep medical debt off of consumer reports so that isn't held against someone who's saying, trying to get a loan to buy a car or start up a business. So I think we'll see action on that this session.
Great. I should mention that Maryland used to be 50th in our emergency waiting rooms, long wait times. And Delegate Spiegel just mentioned Delegate Lopez. She was my partner in passing a law that will allow folks who are not yet citizens but have gotten all of the qualification, past certification, all that, to practice healthcare in Maryland because they're educated in Maryland, then they have to leave the state or had to. It is now, we passed it last year, and that's a big deal. So we will get more ethnically and linguistically diverse nurses, home healthcare aides, doctors, veterinarians, all that to be serving in Maryland. And a couple of people asked about that. We're going to shift to one of the many big elephants in the room, literally, not actually literally, but elephants on the Trump administration. So I'm going to start narrow and then we'll go broadly. So will you continue to safeguard Maryland communities from the Trump administration? Does the team oppose the deportation of undocumented immigrants? What are your plans to face challenges with policies of the new administration? What are you going to do to resist deportation efforts in Montgomery County? There are a lot of you who have this top of mind. So, Delegate Spiegel, why don't you start us off?
Thank you, Senator. That's a big series of questions.
Yeah.
But let me start by saying our Attorney General's office has already made clear that our state is going to be extremely assertive in protecting the rights of immigrants. Our state joined a lawsuit that has already been filed with, I think, 20 other states to challenge the administration's ridiculous, in my opinion, executive order trying to undo the first clause of the 14th Amendment of the U.S. Constitution, which says everyone who is born here is entitled to birthright citizenship, period, end of sentence. And so I think just like we saw with the last Trump administration and our previous attorney general, you're going to see a lot of efforts from the Attorney General's office in Maryland to really focus in, use the resources of that office and the lawyers there. I believe they have expanded in a federal civil litigation unit that there's going to be able to focus a number of lawyers' work primarily on that. And we're going to have to challenge a lot of the things that the Trump administration is doing in court, particularly a lot of the immigration issues. And I think our job as legislators is to support the Attorney General with resources to make sure that their office can continue to fight those fights.
Thank you. Delegate Vogel, anything you want to add on?
Sure, a couple things. One, I touched on at the beginning, the work that my team is doing to shore up some of the progress that was made for working families, whether it be union-related legislation or the overtime salaries bill, which I think is of critical importance to so many families in our state. I had a long conversation today on the phone and have been having for many weeks now about the protections that we need and steps that we can take in our state to protect trans children who are one of the communities most likely to come under attack, already are coming under attack by this Trump administration. The idea of the president of the United States in his first 24 hours coming after some of the most vulnerable people in our country, trans children, to me is just repulsive. And third, on the issue of immigrant communities, many of you know I'm an immigrant myself. I feel so strongly about this issue. And just one point that I'm going to make here, the first evening that after the inauguration, President Trump pardoned January 6th insurrectionists who attacked police officers at the Capitol. And the idea that those people are being pardoned while he is criminalizing immigrant families. He took a step yesterday with an executive order ridding sensitive location protections, meaning that now ICE agents can detain families in schools, in churches, in hospitals, and today an action that said that any state or local official that gets in their way will be prosecuted. And I made very clear, I was talking to a colleague today on the House floor, if the federal government wants to come after us, we are ready because we are going to stand in the way of them rounding up and taking away these immigrant families that do nothing but help our economy and uplift our communities.
Delegate Palakovich, Carr.
Yeah, agree with everything my colleagues have said. I'll also flag that Maryland has taken action in previous sessions to protect our immigrant community. We expect more legislation this session. I think really a key piece that is needed is around protecting data. We took action a few sessions ago to keep people's immigration status that's reflected on their driver's license currently, because we do allow for all folks, not just citizens, to get driver's licenses. It's a safety issue, but we don't, and we took action to keep that data from going to the federal government, but there's all kinds of other data that other state agencies are collecting, and we need to keep that, out of ICE's hands as well. So you'll see action on that front too this session.
Good. Well done. Know that we are your allies. There's a lot of legislation. Maryland is a very supportive and inclusive state. There's the civil rights, and there's also the economic piece. Folks who are here, who have jobs, who help our communities, who help care for our kids, who help teach, who help make Maryland such a great place to live, work, and raise a family. So we are allies, and we are looking for all avenues to try to be supportive in partnership with Senator Chris Van Hollen, Senator Angela Alsobrooks, Congresswoman April McClain Delaney, and Congressman Jamie Raskin. So we are allies. I do want to pick up on what Delegate Vogel said, which is I have been working for many months now with Sergeant Aquilino Gonell, one of the heroes of January 6th. Insurrection. He was an immigrant from the Dominican Republic. He was a veteran. He's a U.S. Capitol Police officer, and he was brutally beaten and had to retire from the Capitol Police Force with physical and mental injuries. I created a GoFundMe page because a Trump holdover rejected his benefits for his family, and we just passed $100,000 yesterday. So I'm going to put the link in here if any of you would like to help support his family. They are really struggling because he has no income right now. The next question, let's go broader on the Trump administration. Let's start with you, Delegate Palakovich Carr. Any other issues that you're working on that are going to help protect Marylanders from federal policies?
Yeah, I'd say on the tax front, as I mentioned before, big threat of federal tax changes having an impact to our state. In general, we as a state do just automatically adopt and conform with federal tax changes. So anything that Congress does probably is not going to help the bottom line here in Maryland, and is probably likely to further exacerbate the inequalities in our tax system. So one of the provisions of the Fair Share for Maryland Act that we've included for this year is to have a 2-year pause on any federal tax changes so that they don't automatically go into effect in Maryland, and we have time to evaluate them and potentially decouple from them so that they aren't state law as well.
Delia Spiegel?
Well, looking at it from a sort of a appropriations perspective, there are certainly lots of social justice and civil rights aspects for us to talk about as well. But I think understanding the risks that a Trump administration may pull funding and financial resources from federal formulas and federal grants that will normally flow into a state like Maryland, I think we have to mitigate against that risk. And so I think some of the creative ways to generate a stream of financial resources to support bread and butter things like transportation, like public safety, in the event that we are facing some of those cuts from the federal funding that we normally rely on, is going to be a really important piece of this as well. Maybe not as headline grabbing as some of the terrible things we're seeing with immigration, but to make sure that we have transportation funding, to make sure that we have local public safety funding. So some of these bills about creating regional transportation authorities or looking at ways to give counties and municipalities more authority to generate their own revenue in the event that they're not getting the federal support that they need and that they usually get, I think is also something that we need to do to buffer ourselves against the Trump administration.
Yes, great. Someone was asking about the January 6th folks who have now inexplicably and just appallingly been pardoned by the new president. There was one of the criminals, the insurrectionist, was a member of our state board of elections, and if the Republican Party tried renominating him for a vacancy, I assure you, he would not get through Senate executive nominations. We will be continuing to be quite vigilant about that. Moving on, housing is always an important priority. The Moore Miller administration has made that near the top of their list. They did some thoughtful legislation last year. They're coming back with more this year. Who wants to start on housing? Julie, you want to kick it off?
Honestly, I don't know if I have much more to add from what I said before
Okay.
on housing, so I'm happy to defer to a colleague.
All right, there are more things. All right. Well, I will talk about a really interesting, Delegate Vogel talked about trans folks, homeless shelters. We just had a really good hearing on and briefing on Secretary Jake Day, the Department of Housing and Community Development, and just the desperate need for safe, and I brought up multilingual housing for people with disabilities, people who are trans, people who may have mental health issues and need extra care. And we want to make sure that those are safe and welcoming locations. And so that's something that the administration is coming in on. Another question that we got here, we have not yet talked really about climate. So Delegate Spiegel, anything you want to put out there about climate change?
Yeah, we've got some good bills in my committee and subcommittee that are intended to require our state agencies, when they are investing in large projects, including transportation, to focus on achieving the goals of the project with the most minimal impact to the environment within reason, and making sure that there are mitigation policies in place. Delegate Mark Edelson from Baltimore City is a leader on this issue. So I would say pay attention to that. And of course, anything we can do to invest in alternative modes of transportation, whether it's bike paths or funding for metro or any other type of alternative transportation that is cleaner and better for the environment than having all of us stuck in gridlock traffic on I-270 is a good thing. So I think that's one thing that helps the environment. Of course, we have funding and grants for Chesapeake Bay cleanup and protection, for a lot of other environmental programs as well that are usually in the budget every year.
Great.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, go ahead, please.
So I have a bill specifically focused on helping municipalities seek more private and public funding for electrification efforts. But I just want to send here in the chat. I hope that went to everyone. An op-ed that I wrote just last week in the Daily Record, one of Maryland's statewide newspapers, focused on how Maryland can win the decade on climate. And while we have climate deniers and fossil fuel executives that are now at the highest levels of President Trump's administration, Maryland can be the perfect case study for how a clean energy economy actually works and delivers. So we have to keep moving forward, though. We can't cut back. There are suggestions to cut our climate investments. I think we have to go the opposite direction. And there's a number of bills that have been sponsored this session, including the Renew Act, which would charge a one-time fee to the companies that have polluted so much over the course of our state's history, make them charge them a one-time fee to pay for climate adaptation measures. These are the kind of investments that we can't push down the line, because the longer we wait, the more future generations are impacted and the more it costs us down the line.
Okay, I'm going to mention just a couple of quick things. I think you all know that I sponsored the bill that banned styrofoam in food packaging 5 years ago now, and yet there are places where I will go into a restaurant and I am offered a to-go box that is styrofoam. So if you encounter styrofoam at a local Maryland restaurant, it's shocking when you see it when you travel, but if you are in Maryland, I have seen it in Rockville, in Annapolis, in Ocean City, and in Western Maryland. And each place, it just kind of blows my mind. So if you ever see it available, please contact my office because I want to make sure that we are reaching out and making sure that they know that it has been illegal now for 5 years. The second thing that I want to just mention briefly is that energy policy is huge in Maryland. And you probably heard that even the White House is focused on data centers. The governor had an initiative on building a data center, a big one in Frederick County. And whether it's Calvert Cliffs Nuclear in Southern Maryland, or all of our needs as people use artificial intelligence and everything we do online, it takes energy. And we want to make sure that our electricity bills are affordable. So the percentage of people who have solar panels or wind is not as high as we need it to be. That's not how we're going to solve this problem. We are going to need more nuclear energy. We're going to need more natural gas, and we are trying to get rid of coal and other really bad polluting measures of the sources of energy. So there's going to be a lot of legislation on energy this year. The president and my chair, my committee, we do energy. As vice chair, I'm going to be very involved in those conversations. And then obviously the governor has his initiatives on energy as well. Delegates, anyone want to add anything on energy? Okay.
Our colleague from Baltimore,
please.
sorry, thank you.
Please.
Our colleague from Baltimore, Delegate Embry, has a bill called the Ratepayer Protection Act, which addresses some of the issues that you have seen with your utility bills recently, that all of us have seen with our utility bills recently, to try and make sure that any increases are tied to actual need on the part of the utility. So that's an interesting bill to pay attention to if anyone's interested in that issue.
Okay. Let's each take just a couple of minutes. What's a bill that we haven't talked about yet that you want to highlight? We'll go in reverse order. Delegate Spiegel. Any one more issue that we haven't talked about yet? We're going to start wrapping up.
Sure. I didn't mention yet my bill to establish a pilot program for financial empowerment centers. It's a bill that I brought last year, and I'm bringing back again this year. What this bill would do, modeled after successful program in Gaithersburg that was funded by the Cities for Financial Empowerment, and I believe the city of Baltimore has a similar program as well, would provide free one-on-one, multi-session financial coaching for members of the public, particularly folks in unbanked and underbanked, underrepresented communities that have been the victims of inherent racial bias and other biases that have prevented them from being able to take advantage of credit and reduce debt and do a lot of the things that some of us are fortunate to be able to do and know how to do. And so this would expand that program to a number of locations around the state through the comptroller's office and provide that free one-on-one coaching service, which has incredible ripple effects throughout the local economy and community and can really change someone's life in measurable ways by reducing their debt significantly, improving their credit score and access to capital so they can start businesses and send their kids to college and do all those good things that we want people to be able to choose to do if they choose so. So that bill is coming back, and I'm very excited about it.
Marvelous. Delegate Vogel.
Yeah, so there was an article in the Washington Post a few months ago on how because of the Trump tax cuts of 2017, scam loss deductions are no longer acceptable under federal law, meaning that if you are someone that gets scammed, which is an increasing number of people are getting scammed online, you have to pay. You don't get a deduction on those taxes, and even worse, if your retirement accounts, let's say someone scams you out of $500,000 out of your retirement account, and you can actually get penalized on that in your taxes. So I have legislation. It's a big lift, especially in the current budget environment that we're in. But I want to at least start the conversation, recognizing that you shouldn't be forced to have an even greater penalty after you've already been scammed when it comes to your state taxes. Congressman Jamie Raskin has legislation on this at the federal level. But we're going to try to get it done here in the state, either this session or in sessions to come as well.
Great. Julie, Delegate Palakovich Carr.
Yes, I'll highlight a bill. I think we actually got a question about this too, in terms of the rise of gambling addiction in our state, especially with the legalization of mobile sports betting a few years ago. So I'm sponsoring legislation this session to put more protections in place for players. It's kind of a hodgepodge of things, but everything from keeping mobile sports betting companies from marketing to you if you've requested a temporary suspension of your account, to making it easier for people to get the free counseling and support services that we already offer in Maryland. So a variety of things on that front, really just to make sure that we are having a little bit more balance in terms of how we've created these legalized gambling industries, and that folks aren't ruining their lives through gambling addiction.
Thank you, Delegate Palakovich Carr. There were so many great questions. It was hard to cover them all, so I'm glad you picked that one up. I'm going to flag, I do a lot of consumer protection and transparency, and kind of that's one of my lanes as well, in addition to 911 and elections and nonprofits and stuff. I have a bill on right to repair, which is a national movement that I learned about at a national conference. And what we should be doing is comprehensive right to repair legislation so that you don't have to worry about voiding a warranty or and it allows you to support small businesses. We're doing a very narrow bill this year, is right to repair a wheelchair. If there's a little repair that needs to be done, you shouldn't have to worry about shipping it back to the manufacturer, being without it and not being able to go to work, see your friends, go to a doctor's appointment while you're waiting for it to come back. And I had invited Delegate Erin Kaufman, who uses a wheelchair, to be my sponsor in the House, and the testimony is quite compelling. So we are going to be looking for modest repairs, support local small businesses while making it easy for people who use wheelchairs to get their chairs repaired. If you know someone who uses a wheelchair and you know someone who has a personal story about this, we would love to get your written or in person or on Zoom testimony. The hearing is coming up in a little bit in the Senate, so you can check in on that. There was a really good question that I think we'll use to wrap us up, which is how do we decide what bills we want to do, and what is the process? And so Delegate Palakovich Carr, since you've been the longest in the House, why don't you start, and then I'll pop on and add anything else.
I would just encourage folks, if you're ever thinking about a bill, reach out early. And by early, I mean like summer before the session you are hoping to see something introduced. I think for all of our offices, we get started early. We have a lot of potential ideas. Then when you factor in the bills that we sponsored before that, maybe giving another go, really our capacity does start to fill up pretty quickly. I think for me personally, usually by the middle of the fall, I'm already at my limit in terms of what I'm going to be able to sponsor for that coming year. But you're always welcome to reach out, to share ideas. As I think Delegate Vogel mentioned earlier, we definitely do sponsor bills that we've heard from constituents. Certainly seeing things in the news, the testimony and other issues we get through briefings while we're here in Annapolis. I tend to start like a running document of things I'm hearing during session to think about for the next session. So it's just a little taste.
Yes, agreed. So just like Julie said, yes, from constituents, one of my bills, actually, I should give a shout out. I think Joyce Lippman is in the room. Several years ago, I passed a bill that Joyce had flagged for me about an issue she was having. I'm doing one this year with Aileen Klein, who may or may not be in this room, but she gave us a really good election bill. Small bills, they make a difference though, and it matters. There's also national conferences. I went last year to National Conference of State Legislatures, but also the National Conference of Environmental Legislators. And you learn so much about what other states are doing. I also started a national legislative caucus with and swapping ideas, sharing what we've done in Maryland, and then learning what folks are doing in other states. But in terms of the specific process, which might have been what we were asked, so when we come up with an idea, our staff and all of us do research for a while. We have partners and experts that we go to. We start reaching out to prospective coalition partners, and then we decide whether we indeed want to sponsor that. Julie talked about her capacity. In the Senate this year, we now have a cap. So at some point, if you're too late to the dance, we literally have to say no because we've reached our cap. And so that's a challenge. And then we have bill drafters who do a great job, and we work with them to make sure it does exactly what we want it to say. We have fiscal analysts, fiscal note writers who do research so that we know how expensive a bill might be, if we can afford it. So before the bill comes to a committee for a hearing, our colleagues can figure out whether this is an affordable idea. We have amendment writers. So if we have to tweak a part of it, it was close, but it wasn't quite the way it should have been. They can help us get it right. There are all the people, proofreaders and librarians and everybody who helps us do our job. And we are very lucky to have great nonpartisan partners in what we do. So with that, anything that we should say before we wrap up? I think we should give a shout out to our two mayors, all our council members, all our county partners, our federal partners. We are blessed to be able to do this work, and we are in the middle of our 90-day session. Not in the middle. We are still in the early-ish stages, but it goes fast. And what I always tell my staff is every day that our bills don't make progress is a day they are closer to dying, because at midnight on the 90th night, they're gone. They either have to have passed the Senate and the House in the exact same form and be on their way to the governor's desk, or else they are dead. And so we've got to make sure that we are working quite diligently. And so with that, thank you. Thank you. Please stay safe. Please stay active. Make sure that you're out there and speaking your truth in the middle of what is going to be a crazy 4 years. So take care. We hope to see you soon. I should have said thank you to our staff. If you're hearing me, we all have great staffers also who help us do our work. Rounds of applause. I see Jordan, I see Matthew, Victor, Sharon, Mateo, Matthew, all the people. So thank you to our wonderful staff. Okay, with that, I think we sign off. Thank you all. Bye.